Hello everyone, my name is Vipul Garg and I am a PhD candidate in Material Science at WashU. Today, through this presentation, I want to explore an interesting question that sits right at the intersection of neuroscience and human behavior. We often feel like we are consciously steering our lives, choosing our habits, making decisions, and responding to situations. But neuroscience suggests something very different. So today I am presenting the architect and the machine, neural basis of subconscious reprogramming and behavioral plasticity. To understand how the brain shapes behavior, we can start with the classic iceberg model. Neuroscience estimates that roughly 90 to 95% of our cognitive processing happens below the surface of conscious awareness. Now, why would the brain do this? It comes down to energy efficiency. The brain is an expensive organ to run. Imagine if we have to consciously calculate every step we take or every word we speak, we would be exhausted by breakfast. So, the brain offloads these tasks to the subconscious. This includes our procedural habits, our automatic emotional reactions, and the micro decisions we make on autopilot. And this isn't something mysterious or abstract, it's purely biology. It is defined by specific neural hardware, the basal ganglia, which encodes our motor routines and habit loops, the amygdala, which scans for threats and assigns emotional weight to our memories, and finally the default mode network, which weaves together our past and future to create our inner narrative. Most of the time, this subconscious machinery is running the show, and our conscious mind is just a passenger along for the ride. Now, this brings us to a deep and somewhat unsettling question of unconscious determinism. If the subconscious machinery is running 95% of the show, how much free will do we really have? Are we the authors of our choices, or are we just reporting decisions that have already been made? To investigate this, let's look at a landmark study by Soon and colleagues published in Nature Neuroscience. They placed participants in an fMRI scanner and gave them a task designed to be completely random. They wanted to capture the brain in the act of making a free choice. Here is the setup. Participants watched a stream of letters flashing on the screen. They were told to simply press a button with either the left or right hand freely whenever they felt the urge. There was no cue, no trigger, and no right or wrong answer. Crucially, they had to remember the exact letter that was on the screen the millisecond they consciously decided to move. This allowed the researchers to pinpoint the exact moment of conscious intent. Before I explain the results to you, I want you to imagine this scenario. You are lying in that fMRI scanner. It's loud, it's clear, and you are watching the screen. You are waiting to decide whether to press left or right. If you felt the urge to press a button just now, the fMRI data suggests your brain had likely already made that choice before you even consciously felt the urge. As you can see on the x-axis, the researchers found that the activity in the frontopolar cortex could predict the outcome left or right up to 10 seconds before the participant was consciously aware of their decision. In the word of neuroscience, 10 seconds is an eternity. This is known as the 10-second gap. It implies that what we call a conscious choice is often just the final output, the receipt, if you will, of a subconscious processing chain that started long ago. It challenges our fundamental assumption that consciousness is the initiator of action. So if the machine decides 10 seconds early, are we just helpless passengers in a biological robot? Fortunately, the answer is no. The research shows that while we might not control the immediate impulse, the 10-second lead time, we can update the programming for next time. We can understand this through the predictive processing model. The machine. Think of our brain as a prediction engine. It is constantly using past data, our old habits, traumas, and routines to predict the immediate future. This is what we call top down processing. It pushes old models into new reality. Second, the architect. This is our executive function in the prefrontal cortex. It isn't just there to inhibit actions, its real job is to generate a prediction error. And finally, the mechanism. When we stumble or when we are mindful, we notice a mismatch between what we predicted and what is actually happening. This is the critical time. When we use conscious attention to notice a habit, we send an error signal back to the subconscious. This signal forces the system to update its priors. In other words, we don't fight with the autopilot directly. We rewrite the code so that the next time autopilot makes a different prediction. Now the question arises, does this rewiring actually show biologically or is it just a physiological metaphor? First, let's look at functional changes, changes in how the brain uses energy. A key pet study by Kartenschlager and colleagues investigated something called resting state metabolism. They weren't interested in what the brain does during a complex task. They wanted to know what does the brain do when it is idle. They examined people with naturally higher levels of mindfulness, like Buddhist monks, meaning people who have trained that architect function we just discussed. To measure this, they used FDG, fluorodeoxyglucose PET imaging. Unlike fMRI, which measures blood oxygen and is a bit indirect, FDG PET measures glucose metabolism. It tracks exactly where the brain is burning fuel. They looked at the brain at rest to see if the default setting of the machine had fundamentally changed in people with high dispositional mindfulness. Results showed clear quantitative differences. Individuals with high dispositional mindfulness had significantly higher resting metabolic activity in three networks. The anterior cingulate cortex ACC. This region is crucial for attention control and conflict monitoring. Second, the precuneus, a hub linked to self-awareness and integration. And finally, the insula, which is responsible for interoception, our ability to feel the internal state of our body. Now think about what this means. This is essentially a software update. It means that for these individuals, the brain is naturally investing more energy into emotional regulation and self awareness by default. They don't have to try to be regulated. Their baseline neural state has shifted to support it. Think of it as the engine is beating at a higher, more efficient frequency. But can we go even deeper? Functional changes are one thing, but can we change the hardware itself? For this, we look at a study by Babu and colleagues related to Raj Yoga meditation. They asked a very simple but profound question. Can repeated mental practice change the physical structure of the brain tissue? To measure this, they used a technique called voxel-based morphometry (VBM) via MRI. If you think of the brain as a muscle, VBM is like measuring the circumference of your bicep. It measures the density and volume of the gray matter. Crucially, this was a longitudinal study. They didn't just take a snapshot, they compared practitioners against controls over time to see if the gray matter volume actually grew following the intervention. This longitudinal design is the gold standard for proving causality. The findings were powerful. The MRI scans revealed significant changes in gray matter volume in specific regions. First, the orbitofrontal cortex (OFC). This area is critical for reward processing, decision making, and impulse control. Growth in this region indicates a stronger biological brake on impulsive behaviors. Second, the insula. As we mentioned, this governs empathy and emotional awareness. This provides causal evidence. It shows that targeted attention does not just change how we think, it physically remodels the structure of the brain. Just as lifting weights build muscle fibers, lifting mental weights build gray matter density in the areas responsible for happiness and emotional resilience. We have to ask, does this neural plasticity translate into real life behavior? Does a bigger insula or active ACC actually matter? So I love this study by Pascal Leon from Harvard because it offers living proof of how powerful this is. They took two groups of people who had never played piano before. Group A was the physical group. They sat at a piano and practiced finger movements for 2 hours a day for 1 week. Group B was the mental group. They sat still with their hands on their laps and only imagined practicing the movements. The results were amazing. They found that the region of the motor cortex responsible for learning music expanded in the mental practice group almost as much as it expanded in the group A that physically moved their hands. What does this imply? This confirms that neurocircuitry cannot distinguish between vivid mental simulation and physical reality. This is the biological basis for behavioral rewiring. It means that we can strengthen new neural pathways, new behaviors, before we even execute them physically. As a scientist, we must look at this critically. The data is compelling, but there are limitations we must acknowledge. First is causality. Like the PET study I showed earlier, are cross-sectional. They show correlation between mindfulness and brain metabolism. That's true. But they don't prove directionality. Did the practice change the brain, or do people with those brains just practice more? This is not clear. Second is sample size. In neuroimaging, running scans can be expensive. Consequently, sample sizes are often small, usually under 30 participants, which can introduce statistical noise. Moving on to the third one, which is specificity. In long-term practitioners, it is often hard to isolate mental training from other lifestyle factors. It can be diet, sleep quality, and stress levels, which can influence neural outcomes. And controlling for all these behaviors is really difficult. Finally, measurement issues. A key methodological challenge is that peripheral biomarkers like blood-based markers don't always map directly onto central nervous system changes. In short, while the trends are exciting, the field still needs more rigorous, large-scale, and mechanistic work before we can claim definitive causal pathways for every intervention. Looking forward, the frontier of this field lies in several exciting directions that could revolutionize neurotherapy. First, longitudinal RCTs. We need studies combining fMRI with genetic markers to see how fast this rewiring can happen. Does it take few weeks or months? Mechanistic studies. We need to link the neural change directly to durable behavioral outcomes. Does that increase in gray matter from Raj Yoga meditation study actually lead to fewer panic attacks or better habit retention years later? And finally, clinical integration and personalized medicine. This is the most promising area. Imagine a future of personalized medicine where we combine mindfulness training with neurostimulation. We could use fMRI markers to identify exactly which circuits are underactive in a patient with OCD or PTSD and prescribe a specific mental training protocol to target that region. We are moving from a journalized approach to precision engineered approach for mental health. To summarize this all together, let's look at the journey we have taken. We started with the machine, those subconscious processors like the basal ganglia and default mode network that determine up to 95% of our daily behavior. Also, we face the uncomfortable reality of subconscious determinism, that often the brain decides before we do. But the story didn't end there. We found that while the system is powerful, it is not fixed. Through the mechanism of predictive updating, we saw that conscious attention can act as an error signal, forcing the system to learn. We saw the software update in the PET scans, changing how the brain burns energy at rest. And we saw the hardware upgrade in the MRI scans, literally building new gray matter in the centers of emotion and choice. Final takeaway is this. Through predictive updating, mindfulness, and targeted mental training, both the software and the hardware of the brain can change. We are not just the ghost in the machine, helplessly watching the autopilot drive. Through conscious practice, we become the architects, capable of debugging and upgrading our own neural code. Thank you for your attention. Here are the references used in this analysis.